perimeter of your plot could be completely blind. Now, this is absolutely absurd. This would not happen in any regulated territory on the planet. This is the result, the accidental result, of the lack of master planning and the complete absence of institutions or any kind of mechanisms to regulate the growth of the city and its fabric. This is the result of the complete bankruptcy of the state and its complete disappearance and its inability to manage the territory. This is political, completely political. So I tell him, don't get this site. But the price is extremely attractive. He gets back to me a couple of days later and says, I'm purchasing this site and I have a solution. And his solution was to retract to the back of the site. Because the site is very big, we could ask for the urban planning agency an exception to go up with a tower that would be over 50 meters, 100 meters or whatever. When your site is very big, you were given this exception. The idea was to retract to the back of the site, erect blind walls to my neighbors, but go extremely high, and then get over 100 meters of oxygen space within my plots. Basically, this would mean that where the state did not give me breathing space or oxygen, I would get it for myself on my own property. These are typical mechanisms of survival that come out of the private sector and when the state is non-existent. I refuse to do that because this would be a very violent thing to do for the future neighbors that would come around. And for this reason, I took the challenge and did exactly the opposite. I retracted 4.5 meters at ground level all around the site, which is the minimum distance required at ground level to get legal light and air. And then I started stepping back as I went up, according to the setback law that would guarantee me at 100% of the perimeter full exposure, legal light and air at 360 degree, 100% of the periphery. Basically, this means that I erected a monster that was completely naked, completely open, opening its arms, retracting back, and waiting for the future neighbors to come and have a friendly relationship with me. And that's the result. The result is a very scientific setback of the plateaus as they go up to 50 meters, and an offset, a scientific offset of the plan, of the periphery of the site, all the way up. I did not design this building. This building is the product of a scientific strategy that comes off, that is driven by a very suicidal and masochistic will to address my neighbors in the kindest way and never turn my back to any future neighbor, potential future neighbor in the future. And that it produces shapes. But it was the aim was not formal to begin with. But more important than the shape is the quality of space which was provided. This offset, as we go up of the plateaus, gave us incredible terraces and balconies all around the apartments that we decided to close with a handrail which has the depth of a bar. It's 50 centimeters deep, it's 110 centimeters high. And the idea is that you get out of your apartment and on your terrace, and you put your plate or your drink, and when you have a party, you look out and you address your neighbors on these bars that are completely open to their surroundings. At this point, we're surrounded by agricultural land, but as the area is getting developed very quickly, very soon, I hope and I know we will have neighbors, and I hope that these neighbors will be kind enough not to turn their back to us as we have opened our arms to them. So you see, a building can have an attitude, and that is not necessarily, here it's certainly not a violent attitude of turning your back to your neighbor, development as kind of a defensive development that looks at the outside as if it was a hostile environment, which is what these guys have been doing. This is Beirut, the city I live in, extremely terrifying fabric made of what I call solitary developments, solitary islands. These buildings that go up with blind walls and are completely sealed and look at the outside as a hostile territory, with central cores in the center, line corridors in the middle. I mean, very, very bad space, very bad urban fabric, and that produces very bad social fabric. This is where I live, and I've decided to live around the window that literally looks at this condition. So this is my house. It is built around a 6 by 12 meter window, completely open to the demarcation line of Damascus Road, with 2 cannons on top, pointed southwards towards the enemy. I will not tell you who the enemy is. And I had the chance in my house to bring back the level of artisanry I dealt with when I was building smaller projects. So we got to build the HVAC machinery that hovers above the roof. We got to work with extremely talented carpenters and steel welders and furniture makers and cabinet makers and so on. And that's my terrace above, which is a very decadent posture above this terrifying territory of Beirut, where I've decided to live, I've decided to live there, and not on the coast, turning my back to the city and looking at the Mediterranean, but literally in the middle of the city and smack in the middle of it, in the middle of its violence, because it was a conscious choice to be there. My house is kind of a house built on top of a building that I had also designed. We've worked at different scales. Obviously, my life did not stop with entertainers and developers. I've also dealt with people from the art world. The gallerist was very central. Also, as we tackled projects that were of smaller scale, but also allowed us to have more spontaneous approaches and much faster, because architectural projects take a much longer time. This is an installation which was marked by my first intervention in the art world. Not the architectural gallery work, but the art world literally. And this had to do with the impossibility of exhibiting my work only through drawings and representations. And I built a device that allowed you to take off and through my office basically go on a journey into a space that was very imaginary. I called it the cemetery of my works, where of my unbuilt works, where all my unbuilt projects were hovering above a red plane, which is very reminiscent of the space of my office. This is my office. And I was suspected at some point to have infected the river of Beirut with that red color. Nobody really understood where that red came from, but I have an explanation. It ended up pouring in the Mediterranean, but obviously it was not the red floor of my office. More recently, we have submitted a project for a competition for the contemporary and modern contemporary art museum in Beirut, where I have kind of refused to build a museum, or a conventional museum or a building, but we call this project Stage Zero, as we proposed to dig a hole. Stage Zero would start with the foundations, as we're not ready to build a museum, as I think Beirut at this point in time no one in Beirut, no one really deserves to write or to represent what has been produced over the last 20, 30, 40 years or even more. We still have a lot to do to come to terms with writing the history of modern art or contemporary art in Beirut, as we all disagree to what is what and who did what. So until we're ready to write our own history, not just in museums but beyond, in the building of institutions, we're not ready to build museums like France or Italy or other more stable, civilized nations have erected museums. So this would be completely irrelevant to have a museum in Beirut. We propose a hole, and in this hole, which would be the foundation of a future museum when we're ready to build it, we would have underground tiny galleries that would symbolically link to private collections. Obviously, we would not dig tunnels to the private collections, but we would propose small chambers for private collectors to lend their art to this museum that would then not acquire a collection, but that would be feeding on existing collections that are completely contradictory and completely private. So unlike museums that hold a responsibility in building their collection as they're writing history to the collection that they built, this would be very much a very Beiruti museum, as in the absence of institutions and our incapacity to build or write our own history, we only relied on private ventures or private or individual achievements so far to produce meaning. So this was the whole again. We obviously were disqualified. Although I am absolutely convinced that our museum was certainly the most pragmatic proposal, as it was the cheapest, because it did not require more than 5 to 10% of the cost of construction, because excavation costs 5 to 10% of the cost of construction. It would have not required the burden, the political burden of building a collection and the financial burden of acquiring a collection, as it would have rested on the existing collections of private collectors. But that the jury did not understand. They thought we were just being critical for the sake of being critical. Also at a smaller scale, we did many other interventions. This one has to do with my fascination with speed and the military. So we built a drone, an operational drone, for the Sandretto Foundation back in 2008. It's called Prisoner of War, POW. It strangely resembled the F-117 stealth bomber, yet it is an apparatus that was designed to exchange prisoners of wars across enemy lines. This comes with a video. It's a long story, so I'll spare you the story. A couple of years later, I'm commissioned by the Maxim Museum as one of the 10 new pieces acquired by the new museum built by Zaha Hadid in Rome for the opening of the museum. I built an installation called Diaweding Beirut, which is basically a circuit across points of interest in the city that would allow the cultural tourist to consume the city at a very incredibly fast pace, because that was the trend. And this is, for instance, the Holiday Inn Hotel, which is being penetrated, will allow you to basically go in and out of the hotel in a split second of the ruin through a capsule that we actually built, that we rolled through our office, but also through the streets of Beirut, until my people were arrested by the secret services as we were being suspected of providing evidence that the Shiite militia in Beirut was developing weapons of mass destruction. On a more serious note, this is also a small-scale intervention. This is more recent. This is in Paris just a few months ago. It's part of a series of projects we've been doing for the TUMO Center for Creative Technologies. This was commissioned by the Mayor of Paris. as the vitrine for the school, in which we developed also other rooms, but this is the most visible part of the project. They're flying workstations. Basically, you retract and go up to the roof when the classes are over. And the idea is that this main hall can be used also by the Forum des Images, with whom we're basically splitting the space when there are no longer classes. When classes are not held, the furniture goes up to the roof. These are machines that I built again. I was telling you about the strong alliances with artisans. These are machines we built in Beirut. In fact, we built an operating prototype in 3 weeks. It's an extremely complex machine, mechanically and electronically, as it has to also fulfill very, very complex security measures that are in vigor in Europe, and it passed all of them. But it also has to go up and down without guides at perfectly horizontal equilibrium, and stop at the split second exactly where it should stop in the ceiling, otherwise it would break the whole ceiling. So it was quite a complex piece of technology that the French could not build. So that was my revenge, from the third world to the very advanced French technology, telling them that us bastard Lebanese could do better. And finally, the doctor who, to go back to this idea of the local heroes, the doctor who was my older brother, with whom, for whom I had contributed very, very, in a very humble way. Back in 1986, as I was guarding a rat he had operated on, and which he had implemented the toe as part of his medical experiments as a student at Brown University. And I was being paid $50 a day to make sure that the rat is in good health and to keep him in case there was a problem. After 4 or 5 days of staying up day and night, watching that rat in a cage, I ended up going to sleep. And it is only when I went to sleep, as my brother was on duty in other operating rooms, I fell asleep for like 6-7 hours, and when the phone rang, it was my brother asking me how the rat was doing. And I looked at that cage, which was a transparent PVC cage, and the rat had died because it had moved forward. A stupid rat. It was transparent, so he thought he could get out. He kept on pushing until he got asphyxiated in the corner of the cage. And I tried moving the cage, but the rat would wake up, and was extremely embarrassed to tell my brother that the rat had died. So my brother was infuriated and told me that I could not perform the most modest task that he had given me. He thought he was, pioneering a very important medical discovery, as he was implementing the toe on a rat that had been stripped of its immune system. So the idea is that the rat would feed the vessels of the toe and keep the toe alive. The idea is that you could keep a part of a human body alive if you implemented it on an animal that was stripped from its immunity system until the human was ready to get that part back. Because if you don't re-implement any member, the vessels basically after a few hours dry up and die. So what we thought was a great medical experiment that could have changed the world of medical research was completely a failed experiment because of me, because I went to sleep. And and after that, years later, when I decided to come back to Beirut, my brother, who never took me seriously after that failure of the experiment, told me, "You're going back to Beirut," as my brother had become an American citizen and an important doctor, told me, "You are going to act like a rooster on top of a garbage dump." It is an expression we use in Arabic. When you go back to your little village after you spend some time abroad, and now you act like a rooster on top of a garbage dump. So when I went back to Beirut, my brother told me just that. you know, back in 2010, 2011, I became the mascot of the Johnny Walker campaign, and I became the walking man. And I was all over the place, the 8 o'clock news every day. I got sick and tired of it because people pointed me on the street, and here I was on a 40 meters high, huge billboard, and I was a Johnny Walker man. But if you look closely, I was higher, bigger, but higher, and on top of Paris Hilton, which not a lot of architects can say, do the same. So, and I keep remember my brother's story about being, I think, like the rooster on top of a garbage dump. But I encourage you to do that. You know, garbage dumps are fantastic. You can do in garbage dumps what you cannot do in extremely clean territories, because garbage dumps is where you're needed. It's where your work does good. Because if you work in a completely clean and asepticized environment, you become dormant, you become irrelevant in my eyes. So enjoy your garbage dump, and thank you very much.